Good morning, good evening all. Victor asked me to share some interesting stories about at least two physical mediums. And the first very interesting one is the Icelandic physical medium Indridason. It might be that not many people have heard about him. And my interest came because I was in search of physical mediums, not from England, not from America, but from other European countries. So I went into a search and I found, of course, some of them, but I also found the interesting story of Indridi. And I don't know if there are many people now online who have heard about him, but let me share some interesting stories. He was born in 1883, so we go back quite a long time. And he only practiced his physical mediumship for 5 years, because at the age of 28, he passed to the spirit world because of typhoid fever and tuberculosis. So there was only a very short time in which he was able to develop his physical mediumship. But in those 5 years, he actually developed all physical phenomena you can think of. He was a son of a farmer, and he was uneducated at that time. And in 1905, he attended a circle where they did table tilting. And as soon as he started to put his hands on the table started to rock very violently. And that was actually the sign or the start of his search into physical mediumship. He was afraid of it, but there was also part of him that wanted to know more. So he started sitting for trance and developed very quickly automatic writing. Well, the interesting thing is with Indridi is that his physical mediumship is developed by investigators, by researchers. So there were some researchers, and I will mention their name, but they're quite difficult names for me to mention. It's Kvaran. He was an editor and writer. There was Nielsen. He was a professor in theology. And there was Hannesson. He was a professor of medical science. Well, those three men actually were the main people in his development. And they founded the Experimental Society, which later became the Icelandic Society for Psychical Research. Well, in the time where they started developing Indridi, they sat in a home on the first floor, and they had neighbors. But Indridi was quite known in his early stages for his levitation. So quite a lot of noise was always made during his seances. He sat always in full darkness or almost full darkness. His first control in 1905, or main control I should say, was Gislason. And Gislason was the brother of his grandfather. But he became the main control of Indridi. And he was quite a famous person of that time because he was a professor in Nordic countries. And he was quite a character actually, because there was a second control later in Indridi's development, and that was Daniel Danielson. And he was a medical doctor. Well, he was a softer personality than Gislason was. So the two of them, in developing Indridi's physical mediumship, they could argue in direct voice. So you could hear them in the seance room arguing about how to develop and how to treat Indridi. So that was quite interesting. Indridi, like I said, was very much known for his levitation. They had musical instruments and they were played, they were lifted at the same time as when Indridi was lifted. At a particular stage of his development, there were voices in the room, voices from loved ones, but also singing voices. And one of the main guides or singers who always came to sing in his seances was Maria Felicia, and she was from Milan, and she was an opera singer. And she also passed at the age of 28 in a car accident, but she always came into his seances to sing, basically. After the voices developed, after the levitation developed, Indridi started to develop light phenomena. And it was not only lights in different places and of different colors and shapes within the room, also a pillar of lights seemed to appear. And on one occasion, there was a pillar of light that appeared within the room, and from that pillar, a person appeared. Never has there been described any situation or any materialization where ectoplasm was used. They could not find it back in everything that was written about his seances, but all the people who manifested seemed to manifest from a pillar of light. Well, the neighbors started to complain because of the noise, and they decided to build a completely new home, the Society for Indridi, with not only a large seance room and hall, but also an apartment for Indridi. But in return, he needed to promise that he would only do seances for the society and for the scientists. So that's what happened, actually. The large hall had room for 60 to 80 people. And Hannesson was a very skeptical man in a sense. And at one point he created in the seance room a net between Indridi on one side and all the sitters on the other side, so that nothing could come in between them and the phenomena, because even the musical instruments were on the other side of the net. So he was searched carefully, he was held carefully. They did everything basically to make sure that he did not move from his chair. They even used in a later stage luminous straps and paint. So they really wanted to make sure, also for themselves, that Indridi remained in his seat while everything happened. In 1907, he went to the islands close to Iceland, the Westland Islands, and there he had a clairvoyant experience, because he met a person from spirit named John, and John drowned himself in the sea. But John was at that time not a very kind person, and as soon as Indridi returned back to his hometown and to Reykjavik, John, the spirit person, started to harass him. Most of it happened outside of the seance room. He was dragged out of bed, he was levitated violently, all sorts of things happened. One or two times in the seance room a similar thing happened, but eventually, after a while, this John, who was very violent in the beginning, changed, and he gave up his attacks, and he became one of the strongest controls of Indridi. So I think that's quite interesting. Voices have been heard in different languages, and you should imagine that Indridi was uneducated. So it was in French, in German, in Greek, in Danish, in all kinds of languages people came and spoke. And at least in 47 seances, they found 10 different phenomena. Because his seances were mainly scientific, and because he was developed by scientists, there were a lot of protocols. There are a lot of handwritten pages about his seances. And at a certain stage, there were over 450 phenomena described in 47 seances. So that's a lot. Um, Sir William Crookes investigated the mediumship of Daniel Douglas Hume, and a lot of the protocols that he used were used for Indridi's mediumship as well. So very much they compared both physical mediums to one another. And there were similarities, especially with the levitation, but there were also a lot of differences. For instance, Indridi worked mainly in the dark, and D.D. Hume worked mainly in the light. Indridi had a lot of direct voice phenomena and manifestation of full form people from spirit, and D.D. Hume had not. So there were differences as well. There is a book about Indridi. It's called the Icelandic Medium, but also one of his friends wrote a biography, and that was the organ player. You should imagine that there was not always normal music being played, but there was an organist in the seance room, and he could play the organ if needed. So he wrote a biography as well, and there are some interesting stories. It's not translated into any other language, it's only in Icelandic, but it's quite interesting because one of the stories is that Indridi was in a choir, a church choir, and every week when he went to the choir, people heard extra voices when he was around. Another example that he described was when he went with Indridi to the cafe to have a drink, for instance. Indridi liked to wear a hat. So when they came into the cafe, from mid-air there was a voice, and that voice said, take your hat off and put it on the table. So that's what Indridi did. He put the hat on the table, and the hat was taken by the spirit world and brought to the other side of the cafe and put on the shelf. And the interesting thing was, they had a drink, and at the end, Indridi thought, well, if they can do this, I can get it back. So he said, bring me back the hat, and they did. So all those kinds of small, or actually major things, but small things in his life seem to happen also outside of the seance room. He was also quite for partial dematerialization. And there is one incident described in December 1905, where he was in a cabinet, he was in trance, and at a certain point, he woke up and he panicked because his sleeve was empty. And he even went out of the cabinet and walked towards the scientists, and he was afraid and said, you know, something is wrong because my arm is missing. And that happened a couple of times. But as soon as he got back into the cabinet, the spirit world fixed it all again. So, you know, also those kinds of phenomena happened in his mediumship. Well, his mediumship lasted for 5 years because he became ill. But because there was so much that happened in such a short time, I question, or you know, I would have loved to see him develop, or having a chance to develop more, because I think it's quite extraordinary what he could do in that short time. There was another situation which is very similar to a situation of Swedenborg. When we go back in time, Swedenborg, who used to have a home in Stockholm, when he was away from home, he predicted a fire in Stockholm. Well, a similar situation happened to Indridi, because in November 1905, out of a pillar of light, a man appeared, and he said his name was Jensen, and he mentioned a fire in Copenhagen in Denmark, in a factory. Well, you should imagine at that time, there was no television, there was no radio, they only had the newspaper, and it took 2 to 3 weeks to get the newspaper from the mainland from Europe to Iceland. So they could not check any of it at that particular time. So this gentleman came into the seance room, told about the fire, also came back later in the same seance to share that the fire was solved. And they asked for the newspaper. So around Christmas time, the newspaper arrived, and this gentleman turned out to be right. So he also had those kinds of phenomena within the seance room. Concerning Indridi, I don't know if there are any questions about him within the group.
This coming out of the pillar of light, I find that fascinating. Yeah. I don't know of any other mediums who've done that. Do you?
I haven't. I mean, I've heard of spirit people bringing their own light and lighting themselves. There's the famous one of the painting that was done without the light being held in the hands. But the only other thing I can think back is the pillar of light is you go back into the Bible. Our records are there of a pillar of light and of somebody speaking.
Fascinating. Yes, because as we know, the Bible is full of physical mediumship. If you actually go through it and know what you're looking for. Marcus gets a lot of reports at home, and I'm just wondering if the thing with the cat is something that you've ever seen, had that sort of thing happening.
Oh, geez, that happens a lot. I've had a hat taken off my head, just disappeared, totally materialised, and end up in my car. So I left it there, and it was much the same story. It came back tonight. Actually had an report in the car today as we were driving.
Okay.
This little stone thing we had today.
Oh, but, that's nice.
Yeah, while I was driving, it's the first report in my new car, so I was pretty happy about that. But I've had a similar thing happen with the hat, and I mean, for us, it's all experimental wonder. But it's the phenomena outside of the seance situation that I really am interested in. I find now with my development, the phenomena from the seance room we can take out of there into whatever situation. And I don't know much about other physical mediums who that happens to. That's why I'm so intrigued with this, with Nicole's story.
This is actually the main story that I can share about Indridi. I have a picture for those who haven't seen him, and I can hold it. This is Indridi. Like I said, you know, I think he passed with tuberculosis, but he was not given any peace at all. You should imagine when he set for that society, they had seances almost every night. So I can only imagine what that does to your health and your energy, basically. He had a time where he had some health problems in those 5 years as well. And that was also the time where there were less phenomena and also less psychokinetic phenomena. So a lot of phenomena that he had were not only spirit influenced, but also psychokinetic. And the scientists knew that when he had strong psychokinetic energy, strong psychokinetic phenomena, then he was in a good shape to work with the spirit world. I only think if we look back in history that, you know, he is the only physical medium Iceland has known. And I think he put quite a mark on the history of mediumship there. And not only there, but I think in whole Europe, and hopefully he will become more known outside of Europe as well, because I think he's one of the people that deserves a place.
I wonder if he's working as a control with any of the mediumship circles today.
We had one experience with him in the seance room.
Yeah, just read the effects on the physical medium. It does affect the immune system. That's for sure. I'm always getting colds and blah, blah, blah. And the team have told me, they've given me a list of supplements, including magnesium, all sorts of things, and they really have helped. So the team knows that there is an effect on the medium's organism, but they also know it helps with that because they don't want me to get sick.
I'll take magnesium, potassium, zinc. a strong multivitamin, but we also have minerals in the room. So I don't only take minerals, we also have minerals in the room, in a bowl of water.
I was just going to ask how the scientists could tell the difference between psychokinetic phenomena and spirit phenomena.
Great question.
Yeah. Well, psychokinetic phenomena are phenomena actually created by Indridi's energy. So it was very uncontrolled. When there is spirit influence, it's the spirit world manipulating the phenomena or creating the phenomena. Once in a seance with a physical medium, and the trumpet was levitated, and this particular physical medium himself said what was control, but control said, this is not us doing it, this is the psychokinetic energy of the physical medium and of you as a group doing it. And it was indeed very uncontrolled because it lifted and it fell and it lifted.
Oh, how interesting.
Yes.
Yes. When Indridi came into the circle, did he talk in English or in Icelandic?
He did not speak in my circle. It was my control introducing him. And he used light, a light phenomena, to make himself known.
Wow.
Okay.
My question is, did your control by Indridi give a reason for appearing in your circles? I was wondering if there is a reason that is similar to your work, for instance, that he popped up in your circle.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I truly believe that the pioneers of the past are still very much helping behind the scenes. Because I don't believe that all their experience and their knowledge will be kept in the spirit world. So that's first of all. Second of all, that was in a time of my development, and the spirit world explained that they were in search of another new control to be able to work with me. And they were in a stage of experimenting who would fit best within the circle and with my mediumship.
Oh,
so
that is interesting. That's he was almost auditioning then to see if he would be suitable.
Could be, I don't know.
How fascinating! That's really interesting.
So there must be more people attending your circle from the past, to the pioneers, to try it out.
Probably. There is one person working with me at the moment, but other than that, I cannot really tell you. I'm not sure. I think they have been around, but I'm not sure.
Fascinating. Okay, Nicole, back to you. Let's hear some more of your stories. They are fascinating.
Yeah, well, another interesting story, and of course Anne knows a lot about this remarkable physical medium, is Alec Harris. I've been very fortunate to have some personal meetings and conversations with his grandson. So also firsthand, he was able to share some wonderful experiences with me. Alec was born in 1897, and he's from Wales. And he was not interested in spiritualism at all. Until his brother-in-law Ted, who was a medium, who became a medium himself, invited Louis, Alec's wife, to a table tilting seance. And Alec did not believe any of it. He thought at that time it's all created by the mind, and I'm going to prove you're all wrong. That's basically was his attitude at that time. It changed when he attended a table tilting seance with his wife Louis, and his deceased sister Connie communicated through the table. Well, first of all, he still didn't believe it because he still thought it was Connie knowing the information and doing this somehow subconsciously. But then Louis said to Alec, okay, ask Connie anything that I have no awareness of, because there must be something that only the two of you know that I don't know. And then Alec asked Connie about the name of the book that he read to her before she passed to the spirit world. And she gave the name of the book Girl of the Limberlost. That was the name of the book. And that changed, in a way, slowly, his view on mediumship and on the possibility of life after life. But the big breakthrough, I think, came when his sister Connie materialized in a seance with the famous materialization medium Helen Duncan. So Alec, in the beginning, not wanting to have anything to do with mediumship, slowly was on a journey of becoming one of the greatest physical mediums of all times. And he set for trance in the beginning, and at that time one of his controls appeared. He was sleeping on the diva, and Louis saw his face, his features of his face change into a Mongolian Oriental look. And suddenly, in a different voice, Alex started to speak, and it was Chang. Chang was his chief guide, basically. Throughout the years, many more spirit helpers appeared and helped Alec to develop his physical mediumship. He developed trance and trance speaking. He was a great healer, and he had a big interest in healing because that was his passion. But around 1937, Chang told him that it was time for Alec to start sitting in a cabinet. And at first he didn't want to, but eventually he did, of course. He developed direct voice, and eventually he developed materialization. The interesting thing that might be mentioned is that actually Louis, his wife, was in a way the fuel for his mediumship, because the spirit world told her that she would be able on her own with a group of people to develop direct voice herself. But they also asked her to give her time to Alec so that her energy, her direct voice ability could eventually be brought together with the mediumship of Alec Harris and to bring the voices in his seances. So actually, it was like a companionship of both between Alec, Louis, and the spirit world, working tirelessly together. So later, when Alex started around the 1940s, he started to develop materialization. At first it was partial materialization. Later it was full forms without voice. And again, further on the road, it was full materialization with voices. I think in the best time of his physical mediumship, he was able to materialize at least 20 to 30 people at the same time, walking around in a seance room, and could be seen by all. He worked in red light, but sometimes the materializations illuminated themselves. So both happened. His control that helped him in the materialization process was Rohan. And Rohan always made sure that not only Alec was strapped to the chair because Alec wanted to, but also that he removed the curtain to one side so that the audience could see Alec in deep trance while the materializations walked around in the room. So that's quite interesting as well. But I think it was around 1946 or 1949, I'm not sure, perhaps Anne knows, he moved to South Africa, and his son was there as well. And he continued doing his physical mediumship there. But there was also one major incident that affected him deeply. He held a seance, and Louis already had a feeling that something was not right that evening. And what happened was that Rohan, the materialized control, was grabbed by one of the people in the seance room who turned out to be a journalist. The other man, who turned out to be a journalist as well, ran towards the window and took away all the blackouts and the curtains. And behind the window, there were journalists with making pictures. And that deeply, deeply affected not only Rohan, who needed time to recover in the spirit world, but also Alec has been very, very ill, and actually it could have killed him. After that incident, I think his physical mediumship never became that strong again. So they agreed at first on continuing only on the direct voice part. The spirit world tried to materialize again a couple of times, but there was not always enough power. So that shows not only the dangers that physical mediums are exposed to, but also what can go wrong and how it can affect your health and your life, basically. What interests me most in the mediumship of Alec Harris, because I have a personal interest in physical healing, is his work with the Austrian doctor. And in the book, there is no name mentioned. So I went to Anthony, his grandson, and I asked him about some stories about a spirit doctor. And he said the name was Dr. Karl from Austria that worked with Alec. And Dr. Karl had a very interesting way of appearing, because when he materialized, from his solar plexus, a blue light, pulsating light appeared. And sometimes this pulsating light filled the whole of his being, and sometimes it was only in the area of his solar plexus, basically. The interesting thing is that Dr. treated many people in the seance room, and not only people, but there is a nice story that I like to share, and that's about the dog of Alec and Louis. They had a dog, and the dog was 5 years old, and the dog's name was Wox. And Wox was ill, and he had a skin disease. And the vet actually did all he could do in his treatments, basically. And he said, you know, I'm not sure if I can save the dog. Maybe you should decide to put him to sleep. And that was a very difficult decision for Alec and Louis to take. So on one night, Dr. Karl materialized, walked out of the cabinet and said to Louis that he wanted to go to the dog. But the dog was quite grumpy at that time because he was in pain and uncomfortable. So Louis was a bit concerned that Wox would not allow Dr. Karl to come close. Well, you should imagine that the dog was outside of the seance room, and that the distance between the cabinet and the place where the dog was quite some distance. So the spirit doctor went over to the dog, and they could see in the moonlight, because the dog was outside, they could see the doctor bending over the dog and doing something. And he came back into the seance room and he said to Louis, "The dog will be fine." And that's what happened. Within a week, the dog was cured. And I think this is an amazing story, one of the amazing stories of Dr. Karl and his physical healing. And another story in one of Alec's seances was in South Africa, actually. There was a couple and they wanted to witness materialization. But the gentleman who was there, he was stone deaf since 20 years, so he could not hear anything. So in that particular seance, Dr. Karl went out to this man and he asked if he wanted to be healed. And his wife said to Dr. Karl, well, he's already deaf for 20 years, but you can give it a try. So what happened then, you know, Dr. Carl had that blue healing light, which he also referred to as, this is the healing light, the light that heals people. And he grabbed his arm, with his arm from somewhere in the seance room, a rope of blue ectoplasm, blue light ectoplasm, and he placed it on top of the head of the man, on top of his head and his ears. And it lasted for a moment there. And then he took it away and he said to him, tomorrow you will hear again. And that's what happened. And I think those stories are so fascinating, so fascinating. So yes, you know, Alec Harris was a phenomenal physical medium, very much known for his materialization mediumship. But to me personally, also very much loved because of his healing work. So that's a bit of what I can share about Alec. I don't know if there are any questions. Well, there's one more story that I might to be able to share, which is quite touching. Anthony, his grandson, told me that when he was 3 weeks old, he was for the first time taken into the seance room as a baby. And Anthony told me that at that time, his other grandfather materialized from the cabinet and held him as a baby. So actually, you know, Anthony basically grew up in those circumstances, and I think that's quite extraordinary and touching to be able to hear those stories. So if there's any question.
Thank you. Well, and that is absolutely fascinating, Nicole. Can we hear from Anne? Because Anne, do you have anything to add to those? You must have a lot of other Alec Harris stories as well.
Well, of course, all the stories are in the book, written by Louis. Louis told her friends the stories, and they put them together. But when David Fontana wanted to know more about Alec Harris and said, why wasn't there more? There was only this one little book, which Maurice Barbanel had put out at Psychic Press. And he started to inquire, and he was told when he went to the Spiritualist Church in Cardiff that, well, of course, Alec's son Bradley is living just over the hill in Caerphilly. And so he went up to see Bradley and Anthony, and they got there and they said, well, about it. And he said, well, of course, we still have the manuscript. Do you want it? You know, and David contacted me and said, Anne, are you prepared to put it into a book? And I said, yes, please. But we didn't have to do all the typing of changing it from a typewritten manuscript to computer, because within 2 weeks, a man who'd sat in the circle as a boy, and his father was part of the circle, of the Alec Harris Home Circle, he'd spent 2 years changing it into a digital format for the computer as grateful thanks for the times that he'd sat. And it was spirit just worked together to, you know, so I was presented with it already in digital format. And well, it's all in the foreword. David wrote a beautiful foreword for it. But it was such an exciting journey, because David having met them, then introduced us to the family. And Tom and I went to visit Bradley, had lunch with him, saw photographs, saw the pictures, and I persuaded him to raid the family album to have photographs in the book, and his stories as well. And when I said, well, why don't we have any photographs of materializations or the circle? He said, we never even thought about it. We were too busy. So we were too busy sitting and developing. It is wonderful. And both Bradley and Anthony are wonderful, wonderful people. They're great to talk to. I would like just to add a little bit to what Nicole said. And that was said that if Louis didn't persist and continue to sit for direct voice, Alec's materializations would be able to be out there and be seen, but have no voice to speak. So it really was a joint mediumship. Her ability with a direct voice, then gave them able to walk and speak in different languages too. Because there's a lovely story one night when a policeman was there as a visitor incognito, and in the home circle, well, some of the other visitors, and somebody came and spoke to him, but there was another man, materialized form came through and spoke in different languages. And I think that night there were 7 different languages spoken, as well as a spirit coming to the policeman. And he said he's absolutely convinced of the correctness of the circle, of its genuineness, and there was no way was there any fraud. So they were very happy for them to continue working, because he'd seen all that he needed to say. It was just a wonderful experience for him, but also wonderful for them to know the effect that it had on people as well. But I love that story of the grandfather picking little Anthony out of his crib and walking around the seance room with him. So yeah, because they said they were in South Africa quite a lot of the time. They lived out there, but the years that they went out, I've just checked in the book, I couldn't remember, but I knew it was later, and it was about 1955-56 that they went out for the first time to South Africa, and of course taking Bradley, their son, with him, and he fell in love there with was Anthony's mother eventually, and they did come back to Wales, but then they went out to South Africa for most of the time. And worked out there. But yes, absolutely amazing. It would be wonderful to be able to sit with them. And there's so many stories, so many different people have sat with them. You know, Eric Hatton and George Cranley, the different ones, Alan Crossley. Different people have written the little bits of stories from it. So there's a wonderful, wonderful collection. Well, I'm just going to hold up the back cover if I can. Alec drew all those, not absolutely in trance, but heavily overshadowed. He was a brilliant artist. They've got some lovely paintings at home, but he drew all those sort of like overshadowed, but he was able to see them clairvoyantly, obviously, while he was sitting, and he drew them all his different guides. And where we couldn't put them all in the book in colour because it was too expensive to do, what I did do was that they photographed them for me, and I was able to put them on the back cover. And the copy I've got doesn't have the picture of Rohan on, but the new we did a revision and did it because Bradley couldn't find the picture at the time, and when he did it got slightly torn, but with Photoshop I was able to get rid of where the tear was, so that is on as well. But wonderful, wonderful guides, a wonderful connection that they had.
Well, I think first of all, he had the ability to develop it to such an extraordinary extent. But I also think it was a different time. You know, we live in a time now where we have a lot of distraction, where we live in a very hasty time. People don't sit together as family and friends anymore like they used to do in the past. And I think that's part of the reason why it might take longer, or it might not even happen nowadays.
Just wondering about, hello everyone, just wondering about the statements made before about the journalist getting into the seance room. Why didn't the spirit world, if there's intelligence there, protect the medium? And if people were stood outside the window, surely they must have known that.
They tried.
They did know.
They tried. They did know.
Louis was warned, you know, to try and not to have this other seance. But so many people have been waiting for so long, a friend persuaded her to go ahead. And what he'd done is that the man, I think he was the secretary of the local church, swapped his seat with the journalist. But Rohan, they'd warned them that they could do it, and they were prepared. So this is why I think at the beginning of the story, Rohan comes out very, very slowly into the room, knowing that it's going to happen. and took most of the force from, you know, in protecting. And Alec was actually protected by the side of the cabinet, otherwise it would have killed him completely. But he was protected as when the light fell. He was protected within the cabinet. But yeah, it was they did know, but it had to happen because she didn't follow their advice. And of course, we have free will. So the seance went ahead, knowing that this was going to happen.
Could you tell me the name of the book, please?
Yes, it's Alec Harris, The Full Story of His Remarkable Physical Mediumship.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much.
Yeah, it is on Amazon, and it is available through bookshops if you persist and give them the ISBN number. If you go to my website, SMPP Books, then you'll see all the details there.
Thank you. And it's a marvelous, marvelous book. It's one of those ones that you put on your shelf with your really favorite books.
But when Maurice Barbanel published one, he only published 1/3 of the whole manuscript, and the family were really rather upset. He concentrated on the physical mediumship and not on the healing, and the healing side, the stories there are just beautiful. And of course, Alec, he'd rather have just done healing. He didn't want to do the materialization. And one of the guides said, don't you realize that materialization is also healing?
Nicole, as you were in contact with the family, I was wondering, often you hear that people are developing in the family line, so to speak. So is there anybody from his family sitting in a circle or developing as a physical medium, as you know of?
As far as I know, it's not the case. I know that he is a very spiritual man in many ways, but he's not developing physical mediumship. And perhaps Anne can answer these questions, but I don't think it is.
Yeah, no, he's well. First of all, Bradley, having seen what happened to his father, Alec, said he would never develop as a physical medium. He refused to do it, but he loved doing healing as well. And the dedication in the front of the book, which is to Anthony, Alec and Louis Harris, his grandson, who was told by Spirit that he would continue in his grandfather's footsteps, but on the mental plane. So not intended to be a physical medium, but of course he is a wonderful healer, and really his work is in developing mindfulness and the healing that comes through that. So that's his pathway.
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And I think one of the things about your story, Nicole, that I'd read before, but it hadn't actually sunk in, the fact that Rohan was injured as well, that the spirit himself was injured, the shock, and it actually was something that he had to take back to the spirit world to recover. Mm. That is fascinating, isn't it?
And that's what Anne also mentioned. He also said, it's because I'm such a strong control that I could take at that time a part of it, but I needed to recover, and I'm not sure if I could do it again. So I think partially that was the luck for Alec, that he had such a strong control taking it all.
Sorry, I was just wondering if the journalists invaded that seance and they took photos, what happened to them?
The films were blank.
Uh-huh.
The films were blank. No photos came out.
Is that because Spirit was involved?
Yes.
I think so, yes. They made sure.
Okay, thank you.
And as far as I know, when they grabbed him, he actually just dematerialized and they were left holding nothing.
Hmm.
So, yeah, that was that's a very, very sad thing that happened. And of course, I think most physical mediums these days are very, very careful about who sits with them for that reason. It's one of those issues. Nicole, it's just lovely to hear about European mediums, and I'm going to be processing this video and putting it up for the Americans.
I have a quick question. Is it possible that psychokinesis can be used by the spirit world and give stronger phenomena?
Oh, good question.
I can only guess because I don't have the definite answer. I do know that most physical mediums do have stronger psychokinetic energy because of their physical ability. So I think one doesn't go without the other. I'm not sure if it would strengthen anything. I'm not sure of that. So I cannot give you a definite answer. I think where it concerns phenomena like direct voice materialization, that has nothing to do with psychokinetic energy. But when it comes to levitation, to movements, then we are speaking about other phenomena. It could be, but I'm not sure.
Fascinating. Well, thank you very much, everybody. It's wonderful to have you all here, and we hope you'll join us again at this time. We meet every Sunday. Hi, Vicky. We meet every Sunday at this time, and we've had some wonderful conversations. So thank you very much, and we'll send out an email to everybody once a week with what's on at that week. So thank you, and good night.
Thank you all. Good
Thank
night.
you, Nicole.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.